Hey friends, tonight we'll kick things off with a topic that might seem familiar: sleep, or more precisely, how people in the Middle Ages drifted into dreams, far stranger than you might imagine. Have you ever wondered how they managed to sleep in that cold, dark world? Before you fully relax, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here. And drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's always exciting to see people join us from every corner of the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. Waking at 2 o'clock a.m., not because of a nightmare, not because of noise, simply opening your eyes in the middle of the night, lying still in the darkness, feeling each slow heartbeat, each silent thought drifting through your mind. For many today, this is a sign of insomnia, a signal that something is wrong with body or mind. But the truth may be the opposite. Perhaps what you're experiencing is a remnant of a once natural and widespread habit: segmented sleep, the standard before artificial light arrived. In the Middle Ages, people did not sleep the way we do now. There was no concept of an unbroken 8 hours, no alarm clocks, no blue light from electronic devices to disrupt the circadian rhythm. They slept in two distinct phases, as neatly divided as slicing an old biscuit in half. Clear, intuitive, and so deeply ingrained that many today find it hard to believe it ever existed. After sunset, most would go to bed early, not out of exhaustion, but because that was the rhythm of life. They drifted into the first sleep, deep, complete, restorative. Lasting about 4 hours, this first phase gave the body its initial rest and freed the mind from the burdens of the day. Then, something remarkable happened. They woke. Voluntarily. No one called them, no bell rang. At a certain moment, the body simply knew it was time to leave sleep behind. And so, they woke. No one felt guilty for waking in the middle of the night. No one rushed to close their eyes again for fear of not getting 8 hours. Instead, they spent 1 to 2 hours, the so-called watchful period between sleeps, to live, to connect, to feel the things their busy days had swept away. This time was never regarded as empty silence. On the contrary, it was precious. Some used it for prayer. They sat by a flickering candle, reciting sacred texts, or quietly whispering intimate thoughts to the divine. These prayers were neither loud nor showy, yet they carried a deeply personal faith. Others took to writing. They recorded unfinished thoughts, sudden ideas that arose when the mind was at ease. They jotted down the dreams they had just left, or simply conversed with themselves through messy handwriting. Some spent this time talking with their partner, an intimacy that daytime's bustle rarely allowed. Profound, sincere, uninterrupted by work or noise. They shared unspoken stories, exchanged soft laughter over small joys, or sat side by side, feeling the warmth of each other's presence. And then, in that same interval, there were couples who made love, not hurriedly or on a schedule, but in a natural way, both fully awake, gentle, free from the constraints of time. In the stillness of the night, when the senses grew more acute, every touch and every breath became full of meaning. That closeness transcended the physical and became a deep connection between two souls awakened together, sharing the same space and rhythm of life. After 1 or 2 hours like this, they returned to bed. They did not force themselves to sleep, nor did they use tricks or pills. The second sleep arrived as gently as smoke, eyes closed, the body automatically drifting back to another realm to continue the rest left unfinished. This second phase carried them until the sun rose, signaling the start of a new day. This was not a therapy. It was not a new trend. It was a way of life, natural, balanced, and in harmony with humanity's intrinsic biological rhythm. But everything changed. As artificial light became widespread, as urbanization and industrialization forced people to work by the clock, as sleeping a continuous 8 hours became the recommended standard, segmented sleep gradually vanished from modern life. People forgot that there was another way to rest, another way to live through the night. Today, many wake at 2 a.m. and think something's wrong. They worry, they panic. They grab their phone, Google how to fall back asleep immediately. Search for solutions. They don't realize that their body is simply doing what it was accustomed to for centuries, splitting sleep into 2 parts and using the interval as a sacred space to listen to itself. And perhaps the only thing wrong is that we have forgotten that this was once normal. Biphasic sleep is not insomnia. It is the way humans once lived, true, unhurried, deeply connected. Next time you wake in the middle of the night, don't be afraid. Don't blame yourself. Let your mind settle. Read a few lines of a book. Pray in silence. Listen to your heartbeat. It's not a disorder. It is an instinct never lost, merely forgotten. Between 2 sleeps, people did not lie awake counting the hours. They did not toss and turn with the dread of having to rise early. For those in the Middle Ages, that interval was not an interruption, but a natural part of the night, a strange silence, yet accepted as part of daily rhythm. After the first 4 hours of rest, they awoke, not because anyone called them, nor because of a dream or a sound disturbing them. Their bodies simply roused themselves, gently, calmly, as if it were a plan inscribed in their very blood. No one thought it odd. No one panicked and tried to fall asleep again. Instead, they stepped into the space between slumbers as though entering a familiar room, a moment to do the things of the night world, where everything moved slowly, silently, yet with profound meaning. Some chose to pray, not out of fear, nor in hope of grand miracles, simply to converse with their faith, in whispers, in steady rhythm. Sitting alone, hands clasped, they poured out the day's trivial worries, unnamed fears, or quietly offered thanks for another day alive. No church was needed, no priest, only themselves, in stillness. Others took up books to read, not for entertainment, nor to learn something specific. They read to keep their minds from emptiness. Each letter felt like a breath, slow, deep, intimately familiar. For the literate, reading at night was no luxury. It was salvation. A few went to check around the house, seeing if the hearth still burned, making sure doors were firmly shut, straightening a table, picking up a misplaced item. They worked with their hands, with familiar eyes scanning every corner. No clear reason, simply because their minds were alert and they wanted to do something small to remind themselves they still held sway over their world. But not everyone used that time for quiet tasks. Some looked at the partner sleeping beside them, then gently placed their hand in theirs. A soft touch, no words spoken. Feeling warmth from another body made the heart soften. No explanation needed, no plan required. In that moment, every safeguard fell away. People drew closer, speaking a language without sound. It was not mere physical satisfaction. It was connection. A moment that whispered, "We are here together now." Indeed, medical writings of the time even recommended that the waking interval be the ideal moment for spouses to be intimate, because their bodies had rested somewhat. Their minds were no longer tense. Both could reach each other through peace, without hurry, without fatigue. Perhaps that advice came from a physician. Perhaps it was observation by those who had lived long with the habit. However it emerged, people believed it, and they lived accordingly, slowly, unafraid to awaken, unhurried to return to sleep merely because an invisible clock ticked in their minds. Compared to today, it is hard to imagine. Now, waking in the middle of the night is a nightmare. People think something is wrong. They reach for their phones, scroll endlessly, try to lull themselves back to sleep with blue light. Some even take pills, convinced that if they cannot fall back asleep immediately, their next day will be ruined. No one allows themselves to simply lie awake in the dark. No one sees it as a natural part of sleep. No one believes that sometimes, between two periods of shut eyes, is when we connect most deeply to our inner selves. Thus, those small habits, prayer, reading, adjusting a pillow, gazing at a loved one, have gradually vanished over time. But that does not mean they lost their value. In our tense modern world, perhaps the silence between two sleeps is what we most need. A way of living that our bodies still remember, but our minds have forgotten. Perhaps, when you wake at 2:00 a.m., it is not your body rebelling. It is an ancient memory calling you back, an instinct still there, softly beckoning. Not to do something grand, but simply to give you a moment to look inward, to feel your breath, your heartbeat, the presence of someone beside you, and to remind you, sleep, like life, sometimes needs a pause, so that everything becomes more meaningful when we return. Between two sleeps, people did not lie awake counting hours. They did not toss and turn with anxiety about rising early. For those in the Middle Ages, that interval was not an interruption, but a natural part of the night. A strange silence, yet accepted as a regular beat of life. After the first 4 hours of rest, they awoke, not because anyone summoned them, nor because a dream or sound disturbed them. Their bodies simply stirred, gently, calmly, as though it had been written into their blood. No one thought it odd. No one rushed to force themselves back to sleep. Instead, they stepped into the space between slumbers as though entering a familiar room. A time for the quiet activities of the night world, where everything moved slowly, silently, yet held deep meaning. Some chose to pray, not out of fear nor longing for grand miracles, simply to converse with their faith, in whispers, in steady rhythm. Sitting alone, hands clasped, they poured out the day's fleeting thoughts, unnamed fears, or quietly offered thanks for another day of life. No church was needed, no priest, only themselves in stillness. Others reached for a book. They did not read for amusement, nor to learn something specific. They read as a way to keep their minds from emptying. Each letter felt like a breath, slow, deep, and intimately reassuring. For those literate, reading at night was not a luxury, but a salvation. A few inspected their homes. They checked whether the hearth still burned, made sure the doors were securely fastened, straightened a table, picked up a forgotten object. They worked with their hands, their practiced eyes scrutinizing every corner. No clear reason, simply because their minds were alert and they wanted to do something small to remind themselves they still held mastery over their world. But not everyone spent that time in quiet tasks. Some glanced at the partner sleeping beside them, then quietly placed a hand in theirs. A gentle touch without words. The warmth of another body softened the heart. No explanation needed, no plan required. In that moment, every defense was lowered. People drew closer, speaking a language that needed no sound. It was not mere physical satisfaction. It was connection. A moment that whispered, "We are here, together, now." Indeed, medieval medical texts even recommended that the waking interval be the ideal time for spouses to grow close, because their bodies had rested somewhat. Their minds were no longer tense. Both could reach each other in peace, unhurried and unwearied. Perhaps that advice came from a physician, perhaps from the observation of those who lived long with the habit. However it arose, people believed it, and they lived accordingly, slowly, unafraid to awaken, unhurried to return to sleep merely to satisfy an invisible clock in their minds. Compared to today, it is hard to imagine. Now, waking in the middle of the night is an obsession. People think something is wrong. They reach for their phones, scroll through feeds, try to lull themselves back with blue light. Some even take pills, believing that if they cannot fall back asleep immediately, their next day will be ruined. No one allows themselves to lie awake in the dark anymore. No one sees it as a natural part of sleep. No one believes that sometimes, between two periods of closed eyes, is when we connect most deeply with ourselves. So those small habits, praying, reading, fluffing a pillow, gazing at a loved one, have gradually vanished over time. But that does not mean they have lost their value. In our high-stress modern world, perhaps the silence between two sleeps is what we most sorely lack. A way of living that our bodies still remember, but our minds have forgotten. Perhaps, when you wake at 2 a.m., it is not your body rebelling. It is an ancient memory calling you back, an instinct still there, softly beckoning. Not to do anything grand, but simply to give you a moment to look within, to feel your breath, your heartbeat, the presence of someone beside you, and to remind you, sleep, like life, sometimes needs a pause, so that, when we return, everything feels more meaningful. Dear audience, relax for a moment or sip some water, then listen on. There are more surprises ahead. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people from every corner of the globe join us. Comment 1 if you enjoyed the story. so we can continue bringing you more great tales. Imagine, you are no longer in modern times. There is no luxury spring mattress, no plush memory foam, no feather-light down pillows. Instead, the room you lie in is raw and silent, lit only by the flicker of an oil lamp, filled with the familiar musty scent of dry straw. Your bed, where you lay your body after a long day, is not truly a bed at all. It is a bundle of straw stuffed into a coarse cloth sack, arranged just large enough to lie upon, known by a simple rustic name: the pallet. If you were fortunate in that society, you might have a wooden frame to lift that straw bundle off the cold floor. It helped keep some moisture and chill at bay. But even that small comfort was not enough to make you feel truly secure, for within the very straw that supported your weight, other creatures had made themselves at home. Lice, bed bugs, even field mice. These uninvited roommates came without consent. Each time you shifted, a rustling sound somewhere in the darkness sent a shiver down your spine. There was no way to be sure whether it was only dry stalks brushing against each other, or some tiny fur-covered thing burrowing through the cloth, seeking the warmth of your body. And in those moments, the only thing you could do was pray. Not necessarily because you were devout, but because in the dead of night, with your eyes wide in the dark, you needed something to cling to. A fragile hope that the rustle was only an illusion, that you would not have to share your pillow with a hungry mouse, that you would not be bitten by a bed bug lurking unseen in the straw from days past. Such was sleep in the Middle Ages, not wrapped in softness, but an experience of acceptance and endurance. People of that era did not have high expectations for rest. They did not speak of sleep quality, nor fret over deep or restless sleep. All they needed was to lie down, on straw if need be, close their eyes for a few hours, and forget their labors, the cold, their hunger, and, of course, the tiny creatures keeping them company in the night. No one complained. It was simply the norm, a default reality shared by all. The poor had no choice. The slightly better off might add an extra layer of cloth or a bit of fresh straw, but none enjoyed the privilege of a clean, secure bed, isolated from the invisible threats under them. This created a peculiar bond between people and sleep. They did not view rest as a luxury, but as a bodily duty. When needed, they slept. When fatigued, they lay down. No dreaming, no demand for absolute quiet, and no expectation of being cradled by a silk-covered mattress. And so, they learned to live with discomfort. They learned acceptance. They learned to sleep without absolute security. They learned to trust in fortune, that tonight might be calmer than last night, or at least not worse. From those experiences, medieval sleep was not a pleasant refuge, but a silent form of survival. Each person entered the night without expectation, yet with hope. Hope for an undisturbed sleep, for no bites, for no strange noises. No one voiced that hope aloud, but deep down, everyone understood. To achieve sleep, you need very few conditions. You need only enough calm to accept whatever surrounds you. Amid dim light and the rustle of straw, sleep arrived simply. People closed their eyes not because they believed in safety, but because they knew their bodies needed rest. What happened after they shut their eyes was left to fate. A weary body still required release. An overtaxed mind still needed pause. Whatever lay hidden in that pallet, let it not be too cruel. Today, immersed in modern sleep comforts, countless mattress choices, pillows, essential oils, air purifiers, we forget that our ancestors slept on straw to the sound of uncertain scuttles and alongside very real dangers. And they still lived to see the morning. They rose, worked, loved, and struggled on in an ever-challenging world. Their sleep was far from perfect, yet it was enough. And perhaps that very insufficiency made it deeper, not because of the softness beneath them, but because they slept in a spirit of acceptance, without demand, without resistance. It was a gentle surrender to exhaustion, and sometimes it was the most profound peace to be found in a world of unrest. Imagine thinking of a nightcap as a steaming cup of cocoa before bed. You'd be entirely mistaken. In the Middle Ages, a nightcap was not a soothing drink or a bedtime ritual. It was a vital piece of kit tied to survival. A real cloth cap, stitched from thick, snug materials, sometimes with a long tail like a fairy tale witch's hat. But there was nothing magical about it, only a very practical need to keep the head warm through a biting night. Houses then were not built to trap heat. Stone walls, stone floors, no insulation, no central hearth, no heating system, no electric blankets. Cold crept through every crack, every stone. And in that bone-chilling chill, the nightcap became indispensable. You pulled it on, tugged it low over your ears, sometimes even over your eyes, not to block light, but simply to keep warmth from escaping. Yet the nightcap served more than cold defense. For women, it carried an extra layer of meaning. It was a tool of discretion, a protector of modesty. At the time, hair was seen as intimate, even seductive. A proper woman would never let her hair show, even in the privacy of her bedroom, even with her husband alone. Thus, the nightcap became a symbol of virtue, a thin boundary between decency and indulgence, between the exemplary wife and the woman who let herself go. For men, the nightcap also held cultural significance. It was more than cold protection. It was a subtle signal of off-duty status. Wearing a nightcap meant you were done with responsibilities, done receiving visitors, done working. If you arrived at someone's home late and saw them wearing a nightcap, the message was clear. Do not knock. They were in their private realm. Sleep, rest, and, sometimes, exhaustion reigning supreme. In some households, the nightcap became so personal it turned into a security blanket for the mind itself. Some could not sleep without it, just as today some cannot nod off without a favorite pillow. This habit formed in childhood and followed them through life, a simple object imbued with layers of hidden meaning. There were caps passed down from generation to generation, not for their material value, but because they carried the memories of those who wore them. A father might leave his old nightcap to his son as a way of passing on something intangible: rest, protection, or simply the notion that sleep is part of life we must learn to cherish. In a world of harshness and hardship, the nightcap offered rare softness. But the most remarkable thing about the medieval nightcap was the silence it inspired. No warning sign, no "do not disturb" note, no locked door to muffle sound, just a simple cap. And it spoke volumes to society. The wearer was in a private state, seeking quiet, needing to be left alone. It is astonishing that such a humble item could send such a clear signal. Even more astonishing is that a society without modern gadgets so profoundly respected personal boundaries. Today, we no longer don nightcaps. The very idea provokes laughter, as if it belongs only in cartoons or fairy tales. Yet the notion behind it, retreating from the world, honoring the moment of rest, preserving modesty, remains alive, quietly present in the way we switch off our phones when weary, close our bedroom doors, or text, "I need some me time." Perhaps what the medievals understood perfectly, and what we are gradually forgetting, is that going to sleep is more than a physical act. It is a spiritual ritual, a slow, deliberate process with preparation, boundaries, and symbols. The nightcap, in its silence, performed that transition for them, from the busy beat of life to a realm of rest, soft, discreet, and deeply meaningful. Going to sleep in the Middle Ages was not simply lying down and closing one's eyes. It was not like what modern people call rest. Instead, it was a ritual, solemn, tense, at times a blend of faith, fear, and resignation. Each time one shut their eyes, they stepped into a spiritual gamble, where no one could be sure they would open them again the next morning. For in that era, sleep was not merely a disconnection from the world, but a hazy journey into the unknown, hovering on the boundary between life and death, between wakefulness and eternity. People believed that, in the moment their bodies sank into deep slumber, their souls could be stolen, lost, or disturbed by something malevolent. Death could arrive suddenly, a nighttime fever, an unrelenting fit of coughing, a crushing chest pain with no one to save them. And so prayer before sleep was mandatory, not out of habit, but as the only means of protection. They folded their hands over their chests, bowed their heads low, and quietly repeated familiar words like a spiritual talisman. "If I do not awaken, may God keep my soul." A short phrase, but carrying enough weight to encapsulate their fears in one act of entrustment. No one spoke it out loud, but everyone knew they were signing an unseen pact. If their soul departed in sleep, let it not fall into the hands of the devil. For adults, this prayer was a habit forged in childhood and carried through life, a natural reflex balancing anxiety and hope. But for children, the matter was more complex. They did not fully comprehend death. They did not understand why they must pray. Yet adults taught them to recite that line every night, even before their eyelids closed, even when all they wanted was to hug a teddy bear and hear a bedtime story. Part of it was for salvation, but another, simpler part was to keep them silent, to curb too many questions. Medieval children lived in a world with many unaskable things. Why the family dog slept on the bed while they lay on the floor. Why their mother recited that prayer before lights out with a hint of worry on her face. Prayer made everything enough. so no further explanation was needed. For a medieval child, bedtime was not something to look forward to. It was part of the ritual. They learned to bow their heads, fold their hands, speak the prayer aloud, even without fully grasping its meaning. They were reminded to behave, to keep their souls pure, for if something were to happen tonight, their soul would be saved by God. It sounded like a gentle warning, yet it dug deep into their tender minds. Over time, the act became instinctive. Prayer before sleep, like breathing, needed no reason. There were nights when not only children but adults felt heavy as they closed their eyes. Perhaps they heard that someone in the village had died in their sleep. Perhaps a sudden fever struck a child at home. Or perhaps winter's chill had grown too severe, cutting to the bone. And then, in the darkness, prayers rose thickly. Not just, "Keep my soul," but, "Please do not take anyone else tonight." They slept with fragile faith, a faith enough to keep the heart from caving into fear, but not enough to erase hidden anxieties. Sleep, with all its necessity, became a test of courage, an acceptance of the reality that they controlled little, and so it was best to entrust themselves to someone greater, higher, stronger, or at least to a concept called divine grace. Comfort came from that act, not because everything was guaranteed to be okay, but because they had done their part. They had prayed, they had entrusted, they had wrapped their faith around themselves like a thin cloak. Whether that sleep would lead to morning or not, no one could know. But at least they did not enter sleep empty-handed. Today, when we go to bed, we turn on air purifiers, select meditation playlists, take a melatonin pill, or draw blackout curtains. Yet perhaps what helped our ancestors fall asleep, amid cold, hunger, and worry, was their clear understanding. No one can promise tomorrow, so tonight's sleep must be treated as if it were their last. And so that simple prayer, humble as it was, became a silent armor, not to fight, but to let go with peace. Imagine you are a medieval traveler. Do not expect a private room at the roadside inn. Your dream of a clean, quiet bed, secluded from the world, will shatter the moment you cross the threshold. Back then, the bed was not personal territory. It was communal, a space you shared with complete strangers, even when you were bone-tired after a long journey. You were not asked whom you would lie beside. There was no waiting list, no priority system. First come, first served. Latecomers squeezed into any gap that remained. The inn was like a giant human Tetris game. Bodies replaced blocks, and every inch of bedding was filled as long as there was room to lie down. There you lay, surrounded by labored breathing, snoring mixed with murmurs of half-formed dreams. The traveler to your left might talk nonsense all night. The one to your right could be a peasant whose sweat hadn't dried from the day's toil, or a merchant with dusty baggage and scraps of food still clinging to its scent. Worse yet, they might bring an entire flock of lice. They did not distinguish between old host and new. Once you shared a blanket, you shared the risk of being devoured. You dared not remove your boots, nor unbuckle your belt. In the darkness, trust was a luxury. You kept your purse tied to your waist, tucked in your vest, or hidden beneath the thin coverlet if possible. Your hand continually brushed your belt, checking that everything was still there. That feeling stayed with you all night, a nameless vigilance, hovering between fitful sleep and the vague fear of waking to find your purse empty. There was no locked door, no innkeeper verifying your name, origin, or stay length. You were part of an anonymous stream of travelers, arriving, staying, leaving. The inn cared not whether you slept well. It cared only that the bed remained free for the next guest. For some, this was normal. They were used to sharing space, sharing air, sharing inconvenience. But for travelers leaving their homeland for the first time, the sensation was both strange and unsettling. They could not sleep deeply. Every small sound woke them. Every shift in a neighbor's body made them hold their breath. And in the night, unspoken questions surfaced. Who lies beside me? Do they carry a weapon? Will they wake and reach into my pack? If I close my eyes too long, will I awaken without any belongings? Has someone already slipped something away? Doubt became a companion, seeping through every moment of rest. Yet sleep was imperative. No one could stay awake while miles of road lay ahead. You accepted these conditions as part of the journey. Though anxious, your body slipped into brief, fragmented slumbers, minutes at a time, just enough to restore some strength. You learned to rest without letting go, to relax while remaining ready to spring awake if necessary. At times you heard soft laughter from a corner, perhaps someone dreaming a pleasant dream, perhaps a small group whispering over leftover food and wine. Occasionally, you met the gaze of someone else awake, just like you, unable to sleep for lack of trust. A silent empathy needed no words. Such was the reality of medieval travel. Privacy was a luxury. Sleep was a test of endurance, a way to survive in a turbulent world where people were forced to live side by side, yet always kept a part of themselves in reserve. The next morning, you woke with a sore back. Still having coin in your purse felt like a small victory. A few belongings might be askew, but nothing of real value was lost. You rose, made your bed ready for the next guest, and left. No one asked if you slept well, and you asked no one. Everyone understood. In that world, a night's sleep without losing either possessions or trust was victory enough to keep moving forward. In a medieval farmer's house, sleep did not arrive in privacy. There was no separate bedroom, no boundary between human and beast, between living to rest and living to survive. There, you slept alongside your family, and with residents who could not speak your language, dogs, pigs, even chickens, not out of affection, nor out of any charming habit, simply because it was the only way to keep warm when winter descended. Stone walls, a thatched roof, an earthen floor. None of it could fend off the bone-deep cold. No hearth, no insulation. Nighttime temperatures plunged swiftly and deeply, squeezing the most vulnerable parts, fingertips, toes, spine, as though with icy hands. Under such conditions, sharing your sleeping space with a large dog was not a choice, but a survival strategy. Its thick coat, the steady warmth of its breathing body, was the most reliable natural heat the poor could have. A dog lying at your feet could mean the difference between waking up the next morning or not. It kept your feet from freezing. When your toes grew numb, its body heat pulled you back toward life. You did not need to love it. You did not need to pet it or call its name. You only needed it to lie there, silent and warm. But of course, nothing was perfect. In the dead of night, it might shift. An unexpected kick to your side. A startled jerk that sent its nose brushing against your face. It might growl in its sleep. Or worse, relieve itself on the floor beside you. And then you would wake, half asleep, half trembling, grateful to be alive, yet cursing everything around you. The presence of animals in your sleeping space was not romantic. It was a compromise, an unspoken exchange. I let you lie inside. You keep me from freezing to death. No one needed to say it aloud. No one needed thanks. They simply survived the night together. Chickens were there too, sometimes roosting on a beam, sometimes in a corner where the straw was piled deeper. They warmed no one, but their sounds, the rustle of shifting feathers, the pecking at stray grains, reminded you that humans were not the only ones battling the cold. That entire flock of fowl slept with its own fears, of predatory vermin, or of hungry neighbors creeping in at dawn. Pigs, if present, were not pets. They were practical, a living heat source, and at times, a form of livestock. A healthy pig was both a meat reserve and an unwitting heater on the coldest nights. People lay beside it, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. And in that unforgiving chill, even its odor became forgivable. Nothing about that scene was comfortable, but comfort was not required to survive. One only needed to make it through the night. Sleep existed to restore strength, not to relax, and certainly not to dream sweet dreams. They told no bedtime stories. They burned no scented candles, nor wrapped themselves in down quilts. They simply lay down, pulled over whatever cover they could find, clung to the warmth left from their evening meal, and hoped that the animals beside them would cause no major mishaps. Sleep in that context was part of survival, nothing more. No one asked, "Did you sleep well?" The answer was obvious. It was not good. It was necessary. It was enough. And then, in the morning, when the chickens heralded the new day, when pigs stirred, when dogs sprang to their feet at some distant sound, everyone awoke. No one recounted last night's dreams. No one spoke of how many creatures had shared their bed. They simply rose and began a new day. Fatigue remained, but they had survived another night, and that was enough. The silent companionship between humans and beasts in medieval sleep was not friendship. It was proof of a hard truth. In a world where cold could kill, any source of warmth, whether from 4 legs or 2, was indispensable. They did not call it sharing. They called it survival. And that is how millions, across generations, have slept, not alone, not safely, yet still alive when the sun rose. Cut to Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. You live in a small town where a person's reputation depends not only on their wealth, but on how much they fear God. Every word, every glance, every smallest action can be assigned a darker meaning. Here, faith is not sacred. It is a tool for survival. And more frightening than the devil himself is a fearful human. It all begins hazily. A few young girls in the town, including Betty Paris, suddenly exhibit strange behavior. They scream involuntarily, their bodies convulsing as if manipulated by an unseen force. They shriek the names of absent people, cry out that they are being strangled, their hair pulled, their bodies pressed into beds by spirits. No one understands what is happening. Mothers weep, fathers pray. The entire community stares at each other in confusion. Then, when the local doctor can offer no medical explanation, he utters a single word: witch. That word is like dry tinder thrown onto a powder keg. It explodes, and panic ignites. Everyone begins to view each other with new eyes. Every shiver, every sideways glance, every whisper can be interpreted as evidence of dark sorcery. A once tight community becomes a chessboard where every person plays to survive. From those initial accusations, trials spring up like mushrooms after rain. No proof is required. No witness testimony is needed. Only a girl's scream, a finger pointed, a claim of being haunted. And the accused, no explanation welcome, immediately becomes the target. Elderly women, solitary folk, those who have lost a child, anyone who has quarreled with a neighbor. Anyone can be dragged into the light as a witch. From that moment, life itself hangs by a thread. You live in this town. You have done nothing wrong. You read the Bible daily, attend church dutifully, observe every rite. Yet you cannot banish the shadow of suspicion from your neighbor's eyes, because you have an odd mole, because your second son cries more at night than usual, because you once planted a crooked tree, or simply because someone needs a name to divert the crowd's fury. And that name could be yours. You watch your neighbor taken away in the dead of night. No one comes to help. Her husband wails. Her child clings to their mother's skirts, but nothing changes. You hear that another woman has been accused because she owns a white cat, and another for brewing healing herbs. Day by day, person after person is drawn into the trap of hysteria, while those same girls continue to shriek, to point their fingers, and each time one more life vanishes. You grow quieter. You speak less. You smile less. You dare not meet anyone's gaze for too long. You avoid touching anyone unless you must. Each evening, you check the door 3 times before sleep. And when you pray, you do not only ask God to protect your family, you pray that your name go unspoken tomorrow. You shrink. Your actions, your words, even your thoughts shrink, as you know this truth. The more you stand out, the more likely you are to be chosen. In the courtroom, you see familiar faces. The person who gave you homemade apple preserves last autumn now stands there, hands bound, speechless with fear. The neighbor who helped you mend your fence is accused of riding a broom at midnight. And the friend who once studied scripture with your daughter lies cold in the ground, all because she refused to confess. You witness justice twisted, faith defiled, and religion, once a guiding light, turned into a tool of punishment. You want to shout that it's all madness, that every accusation is baseless, but you dare not. For you know this: The only one brave enough to defend a witch will be the next one labeled as one. And so you carry on, silently, fearfully, living in the shadow of yourself. Each day you pray the town awakens. Each night you wait for someone else's doom, hoping it isn't yours. You are no longer yourself. You are only a shell, a devout citizen, nodding at the right moment, avoiding certain glances, remaining invisible through your silence. For in Salem, 1692, survival does not mean justice. It means simply not being named. You stand in a creaking wooden chamber called the court, where a person's reputation, faith, and even life can be erased by a single accusation. Before you are long benches where judges sit in solemn silence, attempting to cloak themselves in robes of justice in a trial without rules. To your left are the girls, young, gaunt, eyes wild with hysteria. Whenever an accused person enters, a mere unconscious glance at them sets the girls screaming. Their bodies convulse. They collapse onto the floor as if strangled by an invisible force. Then, a roar of terror, and the accusations pour forth without end. "She's strangling me. Her spirit stands right there, behind that gentleman." No one questions how they can see a spirit. No one demands tangible proof. There are no wounds, no witnesses, nothing but the screams of a distraught girl. Yet that alone suffices to have someone chained, stripped of freedom, and dragged toward a makeshift gallows in the clearing beyond the village. The court accepts what they call spectral evidence, a vague but perilous notion allowing accusers to use dreams, premonitions, convulsions, or even a strange mark on the skin as proof of another's guilt. You cannot defend against what never happened. You cannot refute that which exists only in someone's imagination. And if you protest, you risk being the next to be pointed at. You watch those led into the trial, sometimes a solitary elderly woman who dares arrive late at church, sometimes a poor girl with an unusual gaze. Even a 4-year-old child has been accused of talking to a black cat. All are the same once dragged before the crowd, silent, terrified, bewildered, trapped in an endless nightmare. The accused have no counsel. They have only themselves. Trembling voices caught in throats, hands clutched to chests, and a fragile hope that someone will believe them. But that hope vanishes the instant the girls scream in unison, convulse violently, roll on the floor as if besieged by a dozen spirits at once. No one champions silence. The crowd trusts only the cacophony, only blood, only the certainty that someone must pay for the town's fears. You witness it all, the desperate eyes, the quiet pleas, the reading of charges without evidence. You see an upstanding matron, renowned for piety, accused because she bears a serpent-shaped birthmark on her back. A child condemned because she dreamt of a red glow upon someone's roof. What once seemed mere fancy becomes reason enough to consign a soul to the rope. You look down at your own hands. A chilling numbness spreads through you. You know you have not been accused, yet. But you also know this. If someone here dislikes you, or if you misspoke the day before, you could be the next dragged into the circle, surrounded by expectant faces awaiting the next victim. You feel fury. You feel helpless. yet you cannot speak, because you are afraid. Afraid of losing everything for a single defense. Afraid your child will wake without a mother. Afraid your name will be placed on the list. And so you remain silent. Not only you, the entire town grows silent. Friends who once laughed together now avoid eye contact. Everyone fears being implicated. Friendship is no match for communal terror. You realize justice no longer resides in this room. Only fear spreads like contagion, and a crowd ready to applaud each new conviction in lieu of doing the choosing themselves. When the accused are dragged away, bound in fetters, you watch them go without a word. They turn their heads once, eyes brimming with tears, lips trembling as they ask a question no one dares answer. What did I do wrong? You do not know. They do not know. Perhaps no one truly knows. For the only wrong they ever committed was living in a moment when fear ruled reason. By the summer of 1692, the gallows on Gallows Hill was no longer a distant landmark. It had become part of daily life, as though death had shifted from the unexpected to a scheduled event. Salem citizens no longer dared look up as they passed the hill, not because they could not see it, but because they had grown all too familiar with the sight. The rope dangling, the wooden scaffold, the wind whispering through the beams, and the silence that followed the final drop. You were there that summer. You witnessed everything, not through books, not by hearsay, but with your own eyes, with your own heart. You stood amid a community fracturing at the seams, where the very values that once formed the bedrock of kindness and faith were now crumbling away. 19 people had been hanged. One man, Giles Corey, was crushed to death beneath heavy stones for refusing to plead. Hundreds more were imprisoned, awaiting trial, awaiting some miracle that might reverse their fortune. But no miracle came. Only indictments, repeated accusations, and silence spreading through the living like mold. The names called were not strangers. They were the friend who shared your meal, the neighbor who helped you rebuild the fence after the storm, the one who cradled your child when you were weary beyond words. Rebecca Nurse, a gentle, devout elder beloved by all, was accused of witchcraft over a few unsubstantiated whispers. She was brought to the stand, standing there as her honor and the community's conscience unraveled. She did not plead for mercy, but her eyes, sad, composed, utterly spent, made your heart ache as if it were being squeezed. Then there was Dorothy Good, a child of 4. Too young to understand the charges, too young to defend herself. They ripped her from her mother's arms and locked her away. When asked why she talked to spirits, she pressed her lips together. No tears, no protest, no words. Her tiny body trembled in the dungeon's corner, where darkness was thicker than injustice itself. Each execution carved a deeper wound into the town's soul. Yet the most painful truth was this. The townspeople continued to walk past those wounds as though they were a necessary catharsis, as though to keep Salem pure, blood had to be spilled. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. And that understanding weighed your heart down more each passing day. One morning, you approached Gallows Hill, not out of curiosity, but because someone you knew would die there that day. This was the person who gathered herbs for you last season, who once smiled and told you, "God will protect us." Now they stood on the scaffold, hands bound, eyes devoid of fear. Only emptiness remained. The magistrate's voice rang out, reading the sentence. No one dared object. No one intervened. Then came the creak of wood, and a hush descended. A body fell. You watched their shoes swing gently. There was no blood, but you knew what flowed that day was trust itself, ground to dust. After each death, the town grew quieter, not with the peace of conviction, but with the silence of those wondering, "Will I be next?" Everyone drew inward. Friends drifted apart. Neighbors no longer greeted each other. Children ceased their laughter. The air grew thick, as though the entire town held its breath just to breathe. You wondered, what turned this town into such a place? A place once built on faith, now the stage for trials based on children's cries and fevered dreams. You began to record it all, not because you were brave, but because you feared that if you did not write, the truth would be buried along with the innocent. You wrote of Rebecca, of Dorothy, of Giles Corey, and of those forgotten by history. You recorded each glance, each word, each moment you knew would not be recalled if everything ended here. You wrote for another reason, to remember yourself. In the midst of collective madness, memory was your final refuge, the one thing no one could take away. No matter how many rights to speak, to defend, or even to live, they could strip from you. When you looked back at Gallows Hill from a distance, it was no longer just a place. It was a symbol. A place where reason had been hanged alongside the wrongly accused. Proof of what happens when humanity replaces compassion with fear. You did not know who would be next, but you knew this one thing for certain. This town would never be the same, and you, its silent witness, would never forget that summer, the summer of death, of silence, and of a society that had, by its own hands, shattered its backbone. When the frenzy finally subsided, you did not feel relief. There was no collective exhale, no celebration of an end. Only a cold void remained, and silent glances exchanged, as though everyone were avoiding the stark truth laid bare. They had allowed it to happen. Salem was no longer the town it had been. The trials had stopped. The fervent accusations no longer echoed through the meeting house. No one collapsed at the sight of a specter. The screams ceased in the courtroom. The ropes vanished from Gallows Hill. Yet you knew that what had disappeared were only the sounds. The aftershocks still smoldered in every home, in every averted glance, in every invisible crack running through the community. The judges, after months of imprisoning and executing innocents, stood one by one to apologize. A few bowed before the congregation, admitted their error, confessed they had been deceived by the devil. Some resigned their posts and lived out their days in silence. They were never tried, never shackled as those they condemned, yet in their eyes you could see it, if only for a moment, the thing you had longed to witness. Genuine remorse. The law of spectral evidence which had allowed dreams, convulsions, delirious utterances, or a strange skin mark to count as proof, was finally repealed. No one could again claim, "I dreamed her spirit harmed me," to send another soul to the gallows. Reason began to return, slow and heavy as one waking from a prolonged fever. But you knew the wounds remained. No apology could erase the image of a child bound in chains for alleged witchcraft. No sermon could wash away the echo of a devout elder's shriek in her final moments. You walked past shuttered houses that had remained closed for months. Inside were survivors. Survivors not because they were innocent, but because they kept their silence. They escaped execution, yet they were far from blameless. At the moment of decision, they chose to turn away, and now they had to live with that choice. You saw friends who once pointed fingers now bow their heads. Those who once screamed for justice now fell mute. No one felt certain of their faith. No one dared call themselves righteous. Too many innocents had died at their hands, not by demon's hand, but by boundless fear. You asked yourself, what had you done? How long had you stayed silent? When did you fail to speak up? You did not wield the rope, yet you did nothing to stop it from tightening around another's throat. That truth clung to you like a shadow, formless, noiseless, yet ever present. Salem now was a hollow town. Prayers continued, but in softer tones. No more fiery sermons about the devil rising in their midst. No more cries of "punish her" echoing through the meeting house. Instead, whispers, eyes cast down, empty benches where someone once sat. You saw children growing up never told of those who were hanged. Mothers sidestepped the question when asked, "Why is that house empty?" Elders avoided mentioning Rebecca Nurse or Giles Corey, as though speaking their names might reopen a bleeding wound. Yet you knew the wound had bled long ago, not because anyone spoke of it, but because no one truly looked upon it. Salem's story did not end with justice. It ended with a bitter reminder that justice is not always just. That when fear eclipses reason, it corrodes both truth and humanity. You need no specter to recognize evil. You need only a community unmoored by panic, a crowd eager to vent its fury, and a system willing to trade truth for the illusion of safety. You put this story to paper, not to condemn, but to remind. For you realized, witch hunts do not belong only to history's pages. They surface wherever fear runs rampant, wherever difference is deemed a threat, wherever communities choose silence over resistance, and where an accusation, no matter how unfounded, can cost someone their life. You see it not just in Salem, but today, in whispers on social media, in public shaming, in judgments passed before explanation. Witch hunts no longer unfold in meeting houses. They rage across screens. Yet the essence remains: hysteria, isolation, silence, and victims who forget they still have a voice. You are not sure you can change it, but you believe this: telling the tale is the first step. For each time someone listens, a bit of fear is lost. Perhaps, even if delayed, justice might find its way back. Now, you travel to ancient Rome, a place where power, prestige, and bloodshed mingled upon every marble slab, where, among the most formidable men of the Republic, stood a rare woman who refused to remain in the shadows. Her name was Fulvia. Born into a noble family, she was not merely the wife of one, but of three men who reshaped history: Clodius Pulcher, a wildly ambitious agitator; Curio, a fiery orator; and finally, Mark Antony, the leader of an unraveling empire. But Fulvia was never a mere shadow behind any man. From the very start, she learned to read people, to seize the right moment. When she wed Clodius, she saw in him a force that could stir the populace, ignite riots, and intimidate the Senate. And so he rose like a phenomenon, only to fall by the blade of a political rival. Fulvia did not weep, not because she felt no pain, but because tears wield no power. She used that time to seize her husband's legacy, loyal factions, civic alliances, the hidden paths into Rome's heart. Her second marriage, to Curio, was brief, yet sufficient to bolster her influence. Curio was a masterful orator, capable of moving crowds with words. Fulvia understood that speech could cut deeper than any blade, and she harnessed that power. When Curio fell in the Civil War, Fulvia rose again, stronger than before. Then came Mark Antony, the final husband, whose very name linked Fulvia to the bloodiest conflicts of the Republic's twilight. Antony was more than a general. He embodied power, the promise of a new empire. Yet it was Fulvia who propelled his daring choices, who poured oil on the flames of war, who held firm the home front in his absence. When he ventured east, she remained in Rome, commanding forces loyal to him. She even marshaled troops against Octavian, later Augustus Caesar, not out of blind devotion, but because she believed in her own ambition, in a history that included her name. In those days, Fulvia transcended the role of noblewoman. She was a statesman, a leader. She strode into secret councils, sat among commanders, shaping tactics and logistics. Those who scorned women trembled under her gaze, cold, calculating, unyielding. At times, she ordered traitors executed without trial. At others, she summoned crowds to hear her speak, as if she were co-ruler of the Republic. But war never remains on one side permanently. When Antony left Fulvia for Cleopatra, it was not only a betrayal of love, but the collapse of political strategy. Fulvia was left alone, no general by her side, no fervent crowds to rally. Defeated in her struggle against Octavian, she fled, her power drained like sand slipping through clenched fingers. And finally, she died in Sicyon, far from home, far from power, far from the eyes of those who once feared her. Afterwards, posterity viewed Fulvia as an overreaching ambition, despised by some, revered by others. Yet regardless of praise or blame, none could deny that she ventured where only men walked, and left footprints so deep history could not erase them. Fulvia did not live to receive glory. No statue commemorates her name in the Forum. Yet in Rome's shadowed corners, stories persist of a woman who dared to play politics like a game of chess, to marshal crowds like an army, to stand unbowed among the architects of empire. And you, the one looking back through history, cannot help but marvel, for among emperors, generals, and traitors, there was one woman who governed Rome itself without ever occupying the throne. In 41 BC, as Rome convulsed under the smoke and fury of power struggles and vengeance, one woman stepped forward, unarmored, unarmed, but compelled the entire empire to pause and listen. Fulvia, no mere footnote to history's battles, but a silent, proud, indomitable force. When Mark Antony, her devoted husband, was absent, Fulvia did not retreat. She advanced. She spoke little of duty. She did not preach loyalty. She acted. Firmly, decisively, unafraid of the cost. When cities fell silent in fear, Fulvia rose. Alone, she rallied the people. She raised an army. She commanded loyalty not only with words, but with the presence of one who refused to surrender. Fulvia seized Perugia as though grasping Rome's heart, steadily, not trembling, but to protect. She did not fight for glory or fame, but for power, the rightful power she believed Antony deserved. In her letters to him, she asked not for pardon, nor did she lament hardship. She simply reported that she was fighting, for him and for their common cause. They say Fulvia was the only woman ever to lead a Roman civil war, and perhaps the last, not because no one else dared, but because her shadow loomed too large, too brilliant, too haunting. The siege dragged on. Perugia grew parched. Hunger crept through every alley. Yet Fulvia did not yield. She held faith as one holds a small flame in a storm. Those delicate hands did not shake, even knowing each choice could cost blood. She believed Antony would return. She believed he would not abandon her. But Rome had changed, and love was no match for the rising power on the opposite side. When the city surrendered, Fulvia did not weep, nor did she plead. She rose and met the victor's gaze. Octavian, ruthless adversary, spared her life. He exiled her. Yet living in solitude, exiled, was cruelty greater than death, for she survived in loneliness and the silence of those who once called her troublemaker. Fulvia was sent to Greece, far from Rome, far from the battlefield, far from the husband who once swore he'd never leave her. She lived in a small room, light no longer filtered through gilded windows, but through dim, pale rays. She had no army, no cheering crowds, no political rank, only memory and pride. Fulvia died in silence. No grand funeral, no statue raised in the Forum, no plaque inscribed with her name among history's architects. And Mark Antony, once her world, did not appear. Perhaps he was busy. Perhaps he repented. Or perhaps he had forgotten. But Fulvia did not forget. She carried everything into death. Battles fought, promises broken, betrayals of faith, and the silence of a partner who once stood shoulder to shoulder with her. She spared no complaint, no attempt at justification. She simply closed her eyes, as she had once stood amid legions, proud, yet alone. History has not been kind to Fulvia. She has been called divisive, a woman who intruded into men's affairs, a darkness in a time that needed light. Yet the truth is different. She was the only voice of her era bold enough to stand up, not for queenly title, not for status, but for the belief that women also have the right to grasp the reins of their own fate and that of an empire. They may erase her from official records. They may ignore the battles she led, but they cannot deny that every brick of Perugia, every footstep of soldiers she rallied, is living proof of her existence. Fulvia endures. In memory, in the trembling of a former foe, in the indifferent gaze of those who once turned away. Fulvia needed no statue, no accolade. She needed only one thing, that someone remember her as the woman who dared what thousands of men would not, to love, to fight, to fail, and to die without complaint. And you, the one reading this story, are proof that Fulvia never vanished. She remains here, in memory, in history, in this very retelling. Fulvia was not merely a name on the list of powerful wives in ancient Rome. She was a wind of challenge against a patriarchal society, a rare female voice daring to enter politics, daring to tread the ground reserved for men in armor and wielding swords. Yet history, instead of honoring her, deliberately buried her beneath layers of prejudice and bias. Born into a distinguished family, Fulvia was never meant to stand behind a curtain. From her youth, she witnessed the secret deals, the rivalries, and the unspoken pacts forged at aristocratic political banquets. No one taught her how to influence a crowd, but with keen intuition and gifted intellect, she learned to read the public's mood, transforming herself into a master manipulator of the public sphere through word and gaze. Fulvia did not need to shout. She silenced others with her mere presence. Her 3 husbands were all pivotal figures in Rome: Clodius, Curio, and finally Mark Antony, each marriage a strategic alliance, not as a submissive wife, but as a tactical partner. When Clodius died, Fulvia shed no tears like other widows. She acted. She raised the standard of vengeance, rallied his loyal followers, and turned his death into a political call to arms. Fulvia did not wait for men to defend her. She took to the streets, campaigned, commanded, and spoke before the masses. When Mark Antony entered her life, Fulvia was not only his companion, but the architect of his public image. Some whispered that she was the real power behind Antony's throne. Her boldest moment came in 41 BC, the year she did the unthinkable. She led a civil war. With Antony absent, Fulvia alone stood to defend his place in the second triumvirate. She did not merely issue orders from the rear. She organized forces, marshaled armies, secured supplies, and controlled communications herself. Perugia became her battlefield. Fulvia, unyielding in faith, stood firm, even knowing her adversary was Octavian, a cold and ruthless strategist. The siege dragged on, supplies ran out, hunger crept through every street. Her loyal followers looked to her for hope, and in her hollowed eyes, etched by sleepless nights and pressure, she remained resolute, revealing no hint of fear. Yet Perugia fell. Fulvia did not wail or plead. She did not flinch. She stood tall as she was exiled to Greece, a punishment crueler than death, for it condemned her to solitude and the silence of those who once called her troublemaker. Far from power, far from home, far from the husband who once swore he'd never leave her, Fulvia spent her final days in bitter isolation. Antony, the man who once rested his head upon her breast, never came for her. When death arrived, it brought not a blade, but despair. But the tragedy lies not in her death. It lies in how history recorded her. Male historians painted Fulvia as power-hungry, a meddlesome wife whose only sin was stepping out of the silent role prescribed to women. They neglected to mention that she was the first woman ever depicted on Roman coinage, a symbol of power the likes of which had never before existed. No one recalls that Fulvia was the one who dared oppose the triumvirate, not for personal gain, but to secure Antony's political position during his eastern campaigns. No one remembers that she was the lone beacon challenging Octavian's absolute authority in a moment of turmoil. Over time, the records were rewritten, her name scrubbed from her victories, reduced to a footnote as a powerful wife lost in her husband's ambitions. Yet, to those perceptive enough to read between the lines, Fulvia remains vivid, strong, astute, and fiercely loyal. She needed no divine praise. She only asked to be remembered as someone who dared to live true to her ambition. Fulvia left behind a silent message that women can be warriors, leaders, history makers, but that such a path demands a price, and that price is often oblivion. Today, when you examine those ancient Roman coins, you might glimpse a fearless female face, that is, Fulvia. Not for pity, but as a reminder that history is sometimes written not by truth, but by the power of the living. Yet the truth endures, like Fulvia, waiting to be told once more in a fairer voice. 1963. In 1963, you stand amid a sea of over 250,000 souls, flooding into Washington and gathering before the Lincoln Memorial. No one shouts, no one pushes, no one riots. Yet every footstep, every heartbeat, every exchanged glance speaks the same truth. They are weary of injustice. That march was more than a protest. It was a symphony of yearning, of dreams, of a collective call to reclaim dignity. You stand there, hushed, in that rare moment when humankind can truly feel the power of unity. The songs rising all around are more than music. They are weapons. Freedom hymns, anthems of hope, sung by voices that had never met, yet merging perfectly, as if all of America were singing a single song, the song of justice. You observe the faces before you, elderly, youthful, black, white. They differ in appearance, but their eyes share the same light. A mother cradles her child, tears welling, yet her voice remains resolute. A veteran stands tall, clutching a trembling placard that reads, "I fought for freedom. Now I fight to live as a free man." Each person carries a story, each a wound, but all look forward, toward the man about to speak words that would halt history to listen. You see Martin Luther King Jr. step to the podium. He does not shout, nor pound the lectern. He simply stands there, composed, as if speaking to each individual heart. Then his voice rises, gentle yet unwavering, like an undercurrent that stirs the soul. "I have a dream." No one needs prompting. The crowd falls silent. Those words transcend mere speech. They become a spine-tingling current. He speaks of a nation where black and white children sit together at the same table, where justice is not a privilege, but a birthright. Every sentence he utters is a pulse shared by all. Every image he paints is a door opening to the future. No convoluted rhetoric, no tangled arguments, only truth and dream. A simple dream, yet mighty enough to shake the foundations of a segregated society. You look around. Some brush away tears. Others press a hand to their heart. Someone quietly squeezes the hand of their child. Color no longer divides them. Only one reality remains. All are born deserving of dignity and opportunity. When the speech ends, there is no applause. Instead, a sacred silence. Then, slowly, they begin to move, not to depart, but to press forward, changed. They carry something with them, a new spark, a reason to keep standing. You leave the memorial with trembling legs, yet your heart ablaze. You are no longer an observer. You are part of something far greater. You have seen America not through numbers, but through its people. And you know that dream is not kings alone. It is the dream of an entire nation. From that day on, you cannot go back. You see the world anew. Each time you witness injustice, you cannot look away. Each time you encounter prejudice, you recall the eyes of those who stood beside you that day, unafraid, unresentful, determined. For in the summer of 1963, among thousands, you witnessed a miracle. A single voice, born of heart and hope, can move a nation. And you understand, sometimes, to change the world. All it takes is a dream. When Martin Luther King Jr. stepped up to the podium, amid a sea of people holding their breath, you felt the air shift. Not because of the microphone's crackle, nor the thousands of upturned faces, but due to an invisible, powerful transformation, as if the collective heart of hundreds of thousands began beating as one. He held the mic in one hand, the other relaxed by his side, a gesture honed over a lifetime of addressing communities. His gaze swept over the crowd, not searching for any single individual, yet making each person feel as though he were looking directly at them. He began with the prepared speech, words carefully chosen, the measured rhythm of a polished political address, logical, precise, disciplined. But then, something compelled him to change course. Perhaps it was the endless chants rising from the crowd. Perhaps it was the tremor in the faces before him. Or perhaps a whisper in his ear. Tell them about the dream, Martin. And so he did. He no longer looked at his notes. His voice grew firmer, more alive. I have a dream, he declared. Just 4 words, but 4 words that stilled a nation. And in that silence, his dream took shape, not on paper, but through his words and his faith. You stood there, among 250,000 people, feeling your chest tighten, because what he spoke was no longer politics or slogans. It was hope. It was pain given a name. It was a promise of a future once feared impossible. You did not merely hear his voice. You felt his sorrow, his suppressed anger, and the profound love he held for humanity. These were emotions that could not be scripted. They could only flow from a heart that had witnessed too much injustice, yet still believed in light. He spoke of a nation where people would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And you saw tears fall on faces around you, elderly and young, white and black. No one could remain untouched by that undeniable truth, that something so simple, being recognized as human, had been a luxury denied to so many. You look up at King, and he is no longer merely an activist. He is no longer simply a minister or an orator. He has become a mirror, a dream made articulate. His words seep into your very bones, sending a shiver through you, not from fear, but because you know you are witnessing something monumental, a moment destined to live forever in the memory of humankind. Each sentence he utters lands like a gentle hammer upon the heart. I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Those words seem to touch the raw wound of an entire people, yet also apply a healing balm. No one had ever spoken so clearly, so boldly. No one dared to dream so grandly amid so much hatred and bloodshed. You see clenched fists, sporadic cries of "Amen" ring out. Some press a hand to their chest. Others bow their heads. A few cannot hold back their sobs. For this is no longer a speech. It is a vow. It is a manifesto of hope, uttered not from a seat of power, but from the soul of a father, a son, a citizen, speaking on behalf of millions who had never before had a chance to voice their deepest longings. You realize that in that moment, history changed, not by weapons nor by law, but by truth spoken in love. King did not call for combat. He did not incite revolt. He simply invited humanity to recall what it had forgotten, that we are born equal, that justice is not a privilege, but a sacred right of every person. You leave the mall that day, not with a heart full of anger, but with legs trembling from emotion. You do not know what the future holds, but you know this. You have seen it. You have heard it. You have stood at the epicenter of something greater than any single life. And no matter who you are or where you come from, you will carry that moment in your heart forever. Because Martin Luther King Jr.'s words that day did not merely echo through a microphone. They lived within each person present. They live in your heart, and they will live on. As the crowd slowly dispersed from the Lincoln Memorial, the afternoon sun stretched across the cold, white marble steps. The cheers had faded, the footfalls thinned, yet the echo of the speech still reverberated in your heart like an unfinished melody. A gentle breeze brushed your face, carrying the salty tang of tears, sweat, and hope. You stood motionless, as if afraid that, should you move, the miracle you had just witnessed would dissolve with the setting sun. You could not help but wonder, has that dream, the dream Martin Luther King Jr. lifted from his soul, become reality? A dream that seemed so simple, yet so profound and burning, that people would no longer be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That dream was not mere rhetoric. It was the roar of a nation, the prayer of generations cast aside, the manifesto of human compassion. You recalled each phrase he spoke, his voice, warm and resonant, at times as thunderous as a storm, at others as gentle as a lullaby. "I have a dream," he said, and the very sky seemed to hold its breath. You believed, and those around you believed. In that moment, black and white, old and young, teacher and laborer, all marched to the same heartbeat, as if America's heart had finally found its true rhythm. But time passed, and you grew up in a world far more complex than the dream. It is true that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were passed, indisputable milestones. Segregation was outlawed, schools integrated, ballots no longer restricted by skin color. Yet deep within you, you felt the truth. The system changed, but many hearts did not. Suspicious glances remained. Opportunities were quietly denied. Neighborhoods remained trapped in poverty, violence, and indifference. You began to see an uncomfortable truth. The dream had not died, but it had not been fully nourished. From Los Angeles to Ferguson, from New York to Minneapolis, new protests erupted. The name George Floyd became a rallying cry. The words, "I can't breathe," were no longer uttered by one man. They became the cry of millions feeling crushed, suffocated by an unjust system still alive beneath a modern veneer. And you realize, King's dream is not a destination. It is a road. A long, winding, sometimes dark road that still requires footsteps. It is not only the responsibility of activists, politicians, or celebrities. It is your responsibility, of every one of us. You may not speak in a plaza, nor lead a march, but you can listen, understand, act, in your community, at work, in how you teach your children compassion and equality. You recall the faces around you that day. A grandmother clutching a photograph of her son lost to prejudice. A brown-skinned boy perched on his father's shoulders, eyes sparkling like stars. A suited man holding a stranger's hand as they sang the song of freedom together. Each of them, and you as well, placed a fragment of faith in that dream. The dream is not a fantasy. It is a sacred goal, deserving to be lived for and fought for. You wonder, if King were to return tomorrow, would he smile? Would he see how far we've come, how much we've tried? Yet would he also fall silent at the truth? Injustice persists, merely in different guises. Hatred can hide behind more civilized language. We sometimes grow weary, lose our faith. But then you know, hope never dies, so long as someone keeps the flame alive. And that flame rests in you, today, right now. Every word you choose, every decision you make, every person you choose to defend, is an act shaping the future of that dream. As darkness falls over the city, you depart, but you are no longer the same. Your heart is heavy, yet full. You carry with you one final echo. Before you close your eyes, ask yourself, what have you done to keep that dream alive? And more importantly, tomorrow, what will you do next? for the dream still waits for you. You've just journeyed through mesmerizing pages of history, from medieval biphasic sleep to the Salem nightmare, to Fulvia's formidable rise, to the immortal dream in Washington. I hope these stories rock you into a truly restful night. Before you close your eyes, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and comment which story resonated with you the most. Thank you for exploring history with me before bedtime. Don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see viewers joining us from every corner of the globe. Comment 1 if you enjoyed these tales, so we can continue bringing you even more captivating stories. Now, I wish you sweet dreams, and I look forward to our next time travel adventure together. Good night.